Texas, 1944. Noon presses down like molten glass over the camp's tin roofs. The air hums with heat and flies. Inside the mess hall, wooden tables line the room, scarred by knives and time. Around them sit hundreds of German prisoners in faded khaki, their once proud uniforms now bleached by the Texas sun. The hum of conversation is low, resentful. A soldier at the front opens a box marked U.S. Army rations. Inside, dozens of dull silver tins stamped Salmon, product of Alaska. The sound comes suddenly pop, a metallic breath that slices through the silence. Oil glistens at the rim. A faint smell of salt and smoke rises into the heavy air. One officer, Oberleutnant Franz Boomer, lets out a dry laugh. Fish from a can, he scoffs. Americans even imprison their food. The table erupts in laughter, bitter and contagious. Across from him, an American guard named Private Miller, sleeves rolled, sunburned and steady, lifts a small fork. He says quietly, almost to himself, "Sometimes the ocean fits in a can." The words hang there simple, unpretentious, disarming. The laughter dies down just enough for someone to hear the cicadas outside. Franz pushes the tin away. "The ocean belongs to those who work for it," he mutters. But deep down, something unsettles him. The fish smells faintly of real sea salt, not chemical brine. The American's food seems endless meat, fruit, even sweets. Meanwhile, back home, his wife had written of children trading bread for coal, beyond the wire fences. The world seems impossibly far. The war rages across Europe. But here, in this forgotten corner of Texas, a different kind of battle brews pride against hunger, memory against reality. Private Miller keeps serving the tins, unbothered by mockery. He's from Kodiak, Alaska. His father was a fisherman who once said, "The ocean doesn't judge who eats from it." He remembers that now as he watches these German men sneer at what his people risked their lives to catch. The smell grows stronger. Some POWs turn away, but others, secretly curious, glance at the pink meat. The sight of it rich, oily, almost glowing under the weak light seems to whisper of another world, one not made of barbed wire and dust. That night, when the guards lock the doors, a faint echo remains the sound of tin bending open, the shimmer of the sea contained in steel. No one realizes it yet, but that single metallic pop will echo much farther than they imagine. Night seeps slowly into the Texas plains. The heat fades, replaced by the scent of dust and steel. Inside the dim mess hall, a single kerosene lamp flickers above a long table. Around it sit 20 German prisoners, tin plates in hand. The meal before them glows faintly pink under the light canned salmon, cold and glistening. Surrounded by slices of hard bread, they eat in silence at first, curiosity battling pride. The first bite draws frowns. Oberleutnant Franz Boomer winces. The sea tastes like factory oil. He mutters, wiping his tongue with bread. Another prisoner, Corporal Heinrich Mertz, snorts, "Americans can build tanks, not flavor." The others laugh softly, but their laughter sounds thinner now. Hunger dulls arrogance. The fish tastes of iron and salt. To the Germans, it feels unnatural, the ocean packed and sealed, delivered thousands of kilometers inland. They don't know that the salmon inside those tins began its journey in icy Alaskan waters, hauled from the Bering Sea by crews working around the clock. By 1944, American canneries were producing over 200 million pounds of canned salmon a year, enough to feed soldiers across 2 oceans, and prisoners as well. That efficiency shocks even the officers who once worshipped precision. Every can they mock has traveled by rail through Seattle, across the Great Plains, and into this camp surrounded by barbed wire and boredom. The taste they scorn is a symbol of what their empire could never match a country that can feed millions while fighting a world war on 2 fronts. A U.S. report from that year mentions over 425 POW camps spread across the United States. Nearly 500,000 German prisoners ate the same meals American soldiers did, often prepared by the same military cooks. It wasn't kindness by policy, it was simply abundance by habit. Franz pokes at the salmon again. The texture reminds him of something he can't name, perhaps the herring his mother used to pickle before the war. He pushes the thought away. To him, every flavor from home now tastes like defeat. Outside, The night insects hum. A train whistle moans somewhere in the distance, the same network that carried these cans across America's veins of steel. Inside, one prisoner stares at the flickering lamp. The light trembles over the tin, turning the pink flesh a deep red, almost like muscle. The irony cuts deeper than any knife. They mocked what they didn't understand: the flavor of distance, the miracle of shipping the ocean across a continent. Each bite is a message from a land that industrialized compassion without realizing it. By the end of the meal, no one laughs. The tins are empty, but their pride tastes heavier than the fish itself. The air smells faintly of metal and salt, the scent of a civilization they once underestimated. The next morning, mist clings low over the Texas horizon. Dew gathers on the barbed wire, glittering like tiny drops of mercury. Inside Barrack 12, the men stir awake, their breath visible in the early chill. Breakfast is the same bread, coffee substitute, and another can of salmon. The men groan, complain in low German, call it Maschinenfutter machine food. But one man does not join in. Lieutenant Karl Hoffmann, age 31, from Hamburg, sits quietly on the lower bunk. He turns the tin in his hands. The word salmon catches the light like a metal. He opens it carefully. Pop. The smell rises: salt, oil, a faint echo of something living. He closes his eyes. For a brief, fragile moment. He is no longer in Texas. He's home, 12 years old, standing beside the River Elbe. His mother, Anna, washes fish at the docks, her hands red from cold water. He hears gulls crying, smells brine and smoke from the ships. She looks at him, smiling despite the frost. The sea, she once told him, is generous, if you respect it. The sound of a shovel clanging outside pulls him back. He stares at the salmon again, breathing slower now. It smells like my mother's kitchen. He murmurs. A friend nearby, Corporal Mertz, chuckles. Maybe your mother was American. The others laugh, though gently this time. Carl looks up, half smiling. No, he says, just human. The room falls quiet. Someone clears his throat, embarrassed. The war has taken too much for them to speak openly about longing. Even a simple memory feels dangerous, like weakness. But in that silence, something small changes. The smell of salmon becomes something else, not mockery, but remembrance. From the far end of the barrack, Sergeant Becker pulls out a folded paper from under his mattress. It's a letter from his wife in Bremen. He reads it aloud. Rationing grows worse. We have potatoes, some margarine. The sea seems far away now. His voice cracks on that last line. Carl doesn't move. The same ocean that once fed them now divides them from everything they love. Later that day, Carl volunteers to work in the camp kitchen. It's a small gesture, but it surprises even the guards. He scrubs the counters, stacks tins, watches the American cook slice onions with machine precision. He doesn't speak English well, but he understands enough. Every movement of the knife is a rhythm of peace, not war. That night, Carl sits by the window of the barrack, watching the moonlight shimmer on the tin roofs. He thinks of how the same moon touches the Elbe, the same sea that feeds both captor and captive. For the first time, he doesn't feel entirely on one side of the wire. The next day, the kitchen smelled different. A faint sweetness lingered in the air, butter and onions sizzling. Private Miller, the American cook, moved slowly but deliberately. His sleeves rolled high, his hands darkened by sun and salt. He came from Kodiak, Alaska, where he had spent half his life gutting salmon on the docks before enlisting. For him, this smell wasn't just food. It was memory. He had overheard the laughter the day before, fish from a can. They'd said, factory oil. He didn't blame them. He knew what it meant to miss a coastline. So, before the noon meal, he decided to do something unplanned. He took the standard army rations, the same dull tins, and began to cook as he used to at home. He melted a pat of butter in the pan until it hissed. He added diced onions, black pepper, and a dash of powdered mustard. When the smell deepened, he stirred in the canned salmon, careful not to break it apart. The aroma spread through the camp, salty, rich, alive. Carl, working near the kitchen, froze when he smelled it. "You warm it?" he asked in hesitant English. Miller looked up and nodded. The sea deserves respect even in a can. The German officer didn't answer. He just watched the steam rise, his eyes following the silver wisps as though they could carry him home, around them. Guards shifted uneasily, surprised by the sudden quiet. The kitchen, usually filled with clatter, now felt almost sacred. By noon, word had spread through the camp. The cook made the fish hot today. Men lined up, pretending indifference, but their eyes betrayed them. Each received a steaming plate, the pink salmon now glistening gold at the edges. When they sat down, the first bites were cautious, then slower, then thoughtful. Someone whispered, "It smells like Sunday lunch." Another's, "It reminds me of Kiel." The sound of cutlery softened, less mechanical, more human, for once. There was no laughter, no mocking, only the sound of spoons tapping tin and the low hum of satisfaction that only real food can summon. Private Miller didn't watch them eat. He stood outside the door, smoking quietly, staring toward the horizon. To him, it wasn't charity, it was discipline. Back in Alaska, his father used to say, "You can judge a man by how he feeds those who can't repay him." Behind him, Carl took another mouthful. The salt, the butter, the heat. It felt like forgiveness wrapped in flavor. He thought of his mother's hands again, washing fish under a gray sky. But this time, the image wasn't painful. It was peaceful. The day ended with no applause, no words. But that evening, when the men returned to their bunks, they spoke quietly of the cook. They called him Der Mann, der das Meer erinnert hat, the man who remembered the sea. Noon again. The Texas sun burned white over the camp, drawing shadows sharp as blades. Inside the mess hall, a new smell filled the air, warm salmon, pepper, and butter. The men lined up quietly this time. There was no laughter, no insults, just curiosity. Private Miller stood behind the serving table, his hands steady as he ladled portions into tin bowls. Steam rose in ribbons, curling toward the ceiling. Each man received a share, even the officers who once mocked the meal. Miller said nothing. He simply nodded as they passed. A small gesture that felt more human than orders or rank. Carl sat down first. The fish was tender now, flakes shining under the light. The first bite silenced the room. The second brought something like memory. And by the third, the taste no longer belonged to any nation. Franz Boomer, who had laughed the loudest on the first day, chewed slowly. He looked at Miller across the hall and said, almost to himself, "He cooks like a man who misses something." Carl answered quietly, "Maybe he misses the same thing we do." Around them, the others ate in slow rhythm, the sound of spoons touching tin, the hiss of steam fading, the soft murmur of breath between bites. For the first time, the mess hall didn't sound like a prison. It sounded like home. Outside, a warm wind blew across the plains, carrying the scent of butter and salt through the fence. Even the guards paused at their posts. Sniffing the air, one said, "Smells like Sunday," and the other just nodded. After the meal, Carl stood and offered Miller a nod. Miller gave a half smile in return, wordless but full. Then Carl looked down at his empty bowl and said quietly in German, "Ich dachte, das Meer wäre für uns verloren." Miller tilted his head. "What's that mean it means?" Carl replied. "I thought the sea was gone from us." Miller set his ladle down. "It never left. You just forgot how to taste it." The words landed like a prayer around them. Men looked down at their hands, their bowls, their boots. For a heartbeat, pride seemed irrelevant. They were all just men, hungry for the same sea. Outside, clouds drifted low and slow, like the tide returning after years of drought. Have you ever tasted something that carried you home? Have you ever realized that forgiveness can arrive disguised as a meal? That evening, when the guards cleared the hall, they found no scraps left. Every drop of broth, every flake of fish gone. The war was still raging across the ocean, but here in a sunlit camp in Texas, 20 men had shared a small victory that needed no flag. August 1945. The war had ended, but the camp still breathed with routine roll call, rations, repair duty, sunset silence. Letters began to arrive again, each one marked geprüft censored. The men opened them with trembling fingers, desperate for news of home. Hamburg, Bremen, Dresden, names now written with grief instead of pride. Carl sat by the window, a dull pencil in hand, writing into his small camp-issued notebook. He dated the page August 23, 1945. The ink spread in uneven lines. Today, I ate American fish that tasted like my childhood, for a moment. I wasn't a prisoner. I was simply a man who missed the sea. He paused, staring at the horizon beyond the barbed wire. The afternoon sun shimmered over the dry Texas earth. But in his mind, it became water endless, blue and cold. He wrote again. Perhaps forgiveness smells like salt. The guards had changed since VE Day. They were younger now, more casual. Some even joked with the prisoners. Miller still cooked, though now he wore no rifle, just an apron stained by butter. He hummed while he worked a tune from home, something about fishing boats and fog. That week, Carl helped him unload a new shipment, wooden crates stacked 6 feet high, marked U.S. Army Food Supply. Seattle, the labels stunned him. Canned salmon, Alaska. Still the same fish, Miller said with a grin. Carl touched one of the tins gently. The sea travels farther than soldiers, he said. Miller nodded. And it never loses its way. Later, as the sun set. Carl returned to his bunk and read aloud from a pamphlet left by the Red Cross. It described the Marshall Plan the U.S. preparing to send food to rebuild Europe. Canned salmon, condensed milk, flour, and coffee. The same food that once fed their captors would soon feed their families. The irony made his throat tighten. He imagined ships leaving Alaska again, their holds filled with tins, crossing the same Pacific that had witnessed fire and death, now carrying nourishment instead. From the canneries in Seattle to the ruined ports of Hamburg, the ocean itself had become a messenger of mercy. That night, Carl finished his entry. From factories in Alaska to camps in Texas, the ocean traveled farther than any army. It arrived quietly, in tins of pink and oil. We mocked it once. Now I think it came to teach us that generosity can be industrial too. He closed the notebook and pressed his hand against the cover. The camp lights flickered off, and silence filled the room deep, soft and infinite, like the sea itself. To you watching this, do you believe an act of kindness can survive war? Can mercy travel, sealed inside steel, across oceans and years? Hamburg, 1954. The port smells of diesel and salt again. Gulls cry overhead, circling cranes that swing cargo over rebuilt docks. The city still bears its scars, bombed facades, patched with new brick. Soot stains hidden under paint, but life has returned. Fishermen whistle as they mend their nets, and in the narrow markets, tins of imported goods gleam like treasure. Carl Hoffman walks along the pier, his coat buttoned against the chill wind. He's older now, lines carving deep around his eyes. In his hand, he carries a small lunch tin, not aluminum army issue, but a plain can of salmon, bought that morning from a shop rebuilt near the harbor. The label reads, "Product of Alaska." His son, Emil, follows beside him. About 10 years old, full of questions. "Father," the boy asks, "why do you still eat canned fish when we have fresh?" Carl smiles faintly, sitting down on a wooden crate near the water. The gray waves slap gently against the pier, as if listening. He opens the can with a pocket knife click, twist, pop. The same small sound from a decade ago. The smell rises oil, salt, memory, because once, he says, handing Emil a forkful. It tasted like forgiveness. The boy doesn't understand. Not yet. He just eats quietly, staring at the silver horizon. Carl looks out too. The sea stretches endlessly, the same sea that had carried death and salvation in equal measure. Somewhere across that water were the canneries of Kodiak, the factories that turned fish into food, hunger into dignity. Behind him, the church bells of St. Michael's ring the same bells that once fell silent under air raids. The sound rolls over the harbor, mingling with the wind. Carl breathes deeply. For years, he had dreamed of that moment, the simple act of tasting peace. He reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a small object, a flattened, rusted lid from one of the cans he'd kept hidden since the war. He looks at it one last time, then tosses it into the water. It sinks slowly, catching the light before vanishing into the waves. The ripples widen, fading outward, merging with the sea. Carl whispers something the boy can barely hear. Empires fall to silence. But the sea remembers kindness. Emil looks up, confused. What did you say? Father Carl shakes his head, smiling. Just talking to the sea. A ship horn echoes in the distance. The sun breaks through the clouds for a moment, turning the water gold. The camera lingers there on the glimmering surface, on the rusted lid drifting below before the scene fades into blue. The war is over, but its lessons remain that compassion, once released, travels farther than hatred ever could. The sea carries it still, in every tide, in every breath of salt. Years later, historians would uncover the evidence that quietly connected every piece of this story. Shipment logs from 1944 listed Alaskan canned salmon, 700 cases distributed to POW camps. Navy manifests recorded the same cargo routed from Seattle to Galveston, then by rail to the Texas interior. At first glance, they were just numbers, but behind each figure hid a truth far larger than the war itself, a truth about how abundance reshapes hearts more effectively than any speech. The German prisoners who once laughed at America's industrial appetite eventually came to see it not as gluttony, but as grace organized by machinery. The tins of salmon that crossed the continent represented more than logistics. They represented a nation so confident in its power that it could feed its enemies without fear. And within that act lay the seed of transformation. In Carl's story, there was no sudden revelation, no dramatic conversion, only slow realization, like the tide returning after years of drought. The first mockery became curiosity. The curiosity became remembrance, and remembrance became peace. For every can opened, something invisible also opened inside those men, a window toward understanding that mercy need not whisper in churches. It can clang open in a mess hall under a Texas sun. Decades after the war, when survivors gathered for reunions in Bremen or Hanover, they sometimes mentioned the fish that tasted like home. Some brought their sons, others brought silence. A few even mailed tins of salmon back to their American captors, wrapped in newspaper, labeled simply Danke. They never met again. But their lives had intersected through something as humble as food, a moment where humanity reasserted itself in the most mechanical of wars. Perhaps that is how healing begins, not through treaties, but through taste. The sea that once divided them ended up binding them, carried in steel and salt, teaching them that the heart of civilization is not conquest, but care. So when we think of war, maybe we should also think of the small things that outlast it, the sound of a can opening, the scent of butter on metal, the memory of a stranger who chose kindness instead of pride. The ocean has always remembered. It carried their laughter, their hunger, their forgiveness, and returned them all in waves that touch every shore.